20th, 2024 Invest GP Committee. Chair Blackmore is online, so I'll be chairing the meeting for her today. And I want to start with our land acknowledgement. The city respectfully acknowledges the Beaver, Cree, Dene, and Métis people as the original caretakers of these lands and surrounding areas. We are grateful to live, learn, work, and play on Treaty 8 territory within Turtle Island, and acknowledge that these lands have been home to diverse and sovereign First Nations and Inuit nations since time immemorial. I also just want to start committee meeting by acknowledging all the volunteers, staff, and other people we just had that made an awesome Alberta Winter Games happen. Speaking about investing in our community, that's so good for our local economy as well as community spirit. So thank you to everybody that made that weekend so incredible. And first up, we have a delegation here. So Ms. Hickson, I'll introduce you up with your colleague to introduce yourselves and walk us through what you're going to walk us through. I'm excited for this presentation.
Good morning. Your mics are on, so whenever you're ready. Hey.
Good morning. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to Councillor Pellet for I guess sort of orchestrating this and making it happen. So my name is Catherine Hickson. I'm the CEO of Alberta Number 1, which is a geothermal project taking place just south in the MD of Greenview in the former TMIP, now the Greenview Industrial Gateway. And my colleague is Mark Colombina.
Hi, Mark Colombina, Vice President of Operations for Terrapin Geothermics. We are the majority owner of the Alberta Number 1 project and a geothermal development company located in Edmonton, Alberta.
So we have just a few slides. We just want to run you through. We know we don't have too much time. If I can go to the next one. Next slide, please. Does it want to go to the next slide? Okay. So we're very aware of, Councillor Thiessen had just said, were we aware of Jonathan Banks' work that was done a few years ago? And yes, of course. The important thing I think that everyone needs to understand is that there is a geothermal resource here in northern Alberta, particularly in the Grande Prairie area, and that's why Alberta Number 1 is here. This is some quotes that were taken from the Premier gave an address, I think it was in 2001, and these are kind of the numbers, so 1,500 or 1,150 megawatts of electrical potential, and much of that is actually in this area. It's not in the south, it's not particularly it's not in the east. Next slide. Yes. And I put this slide up just so that everyone understands that, in fact, geothermal can be multi-commodity. I know that there is some, apprehension among the oil and gas, hydrocarbon industry that somehow geothermal might impact their resource. But I want to assure everybody that that's not the case. And we actually have an operating facility in the Razor Energy, Futerra Power, that in the Swan Hills area is actually co-producing. So they are using oil and gas and co-producing the hot water. I mean, it's the water cut, right? It's what comes out of your well, whether you want it or not, is able to, in fact, use that hot water for co-production. We also added to this diagram, we can add some solar to there, we can do power generation, heat exchange. So the province last year in, I think it was August or September, has actually put out a call for call it boutique or micro carbon sequestration. So again, we just want to point out that geothermal, in fact, we can do carbon sequestration along with our CO2 injection. So it just makes this the whole geothermal, it really helps the projects in terms of financial to be able to, if there is carbon, some kind of hydrocarbon, we can separate it. We can also do carbon sequestration. Next. Challenges that we need to but the important thing is that, in fact, on the technical side, particularly here in Grande Prairie. I mean, you have the skills. You have everything that you need to, in fact, do geothermal. I mean, you're just piggybacking off of an industry that already exists. Next. So one of the things that, we really realize and certainly appreciated in this last cold snap, where essentially the grid in Alberta went critical. And it went critical for a number of reasons. One is that there were 2 natural gas power plants that were down, and unfortunately, they were down at a very unfortunate timing. So that even though there's 1,400 megawatts of wind power on the grid, that wind power, of course, doesn't operate when it's below minus 30, as well as after the vortex went through. In fact, it was still. So even if they could have, it hadn't been as cold, they could not produce power. And then obviously, in January, not much solar. So what we did is we actually looked at our Alberta number 1 project. And because there's, I think, a real misconception out here. And that is that, our project is a small project, 10 megawatts. So when you talk about energy, you talk about, hundreds of megawatts. As I say, there's 1,400 megawatts of built wind power. But the problem with that is that it only has what we call a capacity factor. So if you look up on the graph here, our 10 megawatts of geothermal is going to produce 80,000 gigawatt hours per year. The wind is so a 10 megawatt wind farm, because of the much lower capacity factor, is only going to produce about 30 gigawatt hours. And the 10 megawatt solar is only going to be just under 12,000 gigawatt hours per year. Next. So what you see there is just a difference. So now if we actually look at geothermal, because it is base load, so we have a 95, or at least a 95 to 98% capacity factor, simply meaning that it will produce 95% of the time. And if we look at building that facility, so again, we're using the Alberta number 1, so there's a 10 megawatt, we've got that 30 megawatt wind farm and the solar PV. Well, it turns out that the cost of building those to produce that amount of power is going to be the same for the solar. It's about $100 million. The wind is definitely less, but of course the wind has other implications. And I also want to stress that none of these financial calculations include the backup that is required for the wind and solar. And so those backups are either peaker natural gas plants or batteries. And there are 2 grid-scale batteries in Alberta. They were drained within 4 hours of the criticality that was reached in January. Next. But just a little bit more on wind. So those numbers, as I said, do not include that backup, either the peaker or the battery backup that's required. This is simply looking at the land impact. So if we're looking at that wind farm to replace that 10 megawatt geothermal plant, it's over 1,600 acres. Now, yes, you can argue that you can, in fact, pasture and have grains underneath of the underneath the wind farm. But I was just talking, actually, my niece, they live in Killam, have a big farm, and he was saying the problem with the wind farms in terms of agriculture is because of the road access. It cuts the fields up, and so it's actually more difficult to, in fact, farm, and more costly to farm an area that has a big wind installation. But you can see even the solar PV is 278 acres. And, we would be thrilled to get 8 acres. We can actually do it on less of a surface input. Next.
Sorry, Ms. Hickson. I want to make sure people have a chance to ask questions too,
Yep.
so I'm just going to give you a couple.
So let's just skip through to this. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. This is really what I want to focus on. So this is an analysis from Regina. So Terrapin was involved in essentially scoping and putting together a project for the city of Regina to supply a facility that was 22.7 million BTUs per hour. So this is a big aquatic center. And what I want to point out here is just that turnover point. So the thermal cost was going to be $25 million. It's that blue line. The cost to heat that facility with natural gas, so this is a heat only, it's not a power project, was only $4 million to build. But you can see that in basically 8 years, the crossover point is, and the geothermal, because it is, we're not paying for the commodity, you're not paying for the natural gas, is going to save the facility, save the city of Regina millions of dollars as we move out into that 50-year lifespan. So we think you have a resource here. We would like to push Grande Prairie to actually analyze and think about it for new buildings.
Great. Well, thank you. I think your presentation is well timed in terms of it definitely is a conversation that council has occasionally, and I'm hearing colleagues talk a little bit more about it. So definitely well timed. I'll go around the table and see if there's any questions for the presentation. Mayor Clayton, then Councillor Plott.
Great, thanks.
Sorry, Mayor Clayton, then Councillor Blackmore.
Thanks so much. Thanks for coming today. Appreciate that. Curious if you have quick numbers on the cost difference on producing power from natural gas versus geothermal, not the heating of a building from natural gas, but the power generation of natural gas versus geothermal.
Well, natural gas is much cheaper.
Yeah.
Right? In the sense of actually, but that last slide that I showed, I mean, you could transpose that to essentially producing power, right? That's producing thermal energy. And the difference between a geothermal is very much like solar and wind, right? It's free energy that you are using, and we can model, as well as we know that these reservoirs last for 50, 70 years. That's our modeling time. So that when you're producing power, you're not paying for the natural gas to produce that power. So in that case, we had a $4 million natural gas plant. Now, energy is going to be, power is be much more expensive, but I think you can, is relatively speaking. So you're going to make your money back and save money in that 10 to 15 year period of time.
I guess, or if I could have follow-up, I get more of where I'm looking. There's an abundance of natural gas in the region.
Absolutely.
And the exploration of geothermal is fairly expensive. This council, earlier in the year, might even have been last council, I had a sort of an alternative energy study presented to them. And so we're aware of the fact that there is significant opportunity. What's the reality in a municipal world of getting involved in a project like that? Or are you as an organization, what are you looking for? Sure, you said heat a building with it, great, but what's a municipal role, in your opinion, in a project for future power generation from geothermal?
So let's talk about the heat first. You have a number of facilities that are like your big aquatic center, for example. I mean, you had co-production, supposedly from the cogen plant, the biomass, that never worked. I think the first thing that I would do is let's actually look at the installations that were done for the co-production and just see. Now, they would have been sized for a higher temperature than what we could produce from a lower temperature geothermal resource. So, that would be the first thing, is let's look at what you already have. Let's look at what your buildings require in terms of heat, because I know that we can match what we've done for the city of Regina in terms of cost savings, but those cost savings are going to be out in the future.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I think it is important to note that we've got a combined heat power unit at that facility, and it is performing well.
It does work.
We are getting
Excellent.
good results from it.
Oh yes, no, absolutely. I'm not saying you're not. But what you're not getting from it is it was originally designed to actually have heating. And so you have underground piping that has already been built that goes to the hospital, it goes to the aquatic center. It's never been used.
On our aquatics facility.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I know which project you're speaking of, but that's not our project.
Okay, no,
Yeah.
sorry. I
That's
didn't
private
realize there was
industry.
two different projects.
Yeah, you bet. Not a problem.
Councillor Blackmore, then Councillor Plott.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. My question is, we do have one building in town that I know of that's heated by geothermal heat, which is People's Church, and that was built into the building when the construction took place. I'm not really sure how you would go about retrofitting buildings to take advantage of geothermal heat. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I'm guessing that that is actually a geoexchange system. So a geoexchange is different from a deep geothermal. So a geoexchange system essentially uses the shallow earth as a battery. So we put heat into it in the winter, and then we put heat into it in the summer, and we withdraw it. Now, the problem that we have here in Alberta in our cold climate is that we actually are not able to recover enough heat during the summer to balance the winter heating needs. So often you need a backup. So retrofitting for geothermal existing buildings is costly. The University of Calgary is actually working on a retrofit project to look at what those costs are. What I would be advocating is that in new areas, new buildings and whatnot, that you be looking at district heating in those areas, but not trying to look at essentially retrofitting existing buildings.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Plott.
Thanks, Chair Bressie. Thanks for coming in today. A couple questions for you. I'm just curious if you can tell, just on this retrofitting, if we were looking at a brand new building, a new hospital went up, a new multiplex went up, what would be the cost to set up a specific building? So if Eastlink today was a brand new building, what would be your guesstimate on what would it cost be to set up geothermal for a facility like that?
Well, we can use the Regina, the 22.7 million BTU per hour, and the cost of that is 25 million.
25, okay. And so on the 25 million, you're showing a chart that goes out 40, 50 years.
Correct.
What's the life expectancy of geothermal? Is it a never ending, or is there going to be at some point in there, is there a significant cost to upgrade and maintain and relook at pipes and facilities?
So those cost estimates that we did for Regina include what we call workovers, and potentially I can't remember what year, 25, was drilling of a new well. So that facility can be operated with just 2 wells, and the resources at 2 kilometers in depth. So all of these things play a role in terms of the cost. The important thing, though, is that you need to be close enough to the facility to be able to drill your wells. And that's why retrofitting doesn't really work. So in the case of the Regina project, they are in fact it's a unused no longer used rail siding that has a large area, so we can actually get big rigs in there. We can drill 2 deep wells and then build the facility.
Okay. So for a facility like Eastlink Center, you kind of had an 8 acre, just so I can frame in my head, 8 acres for a big facility. What sort of land space would something like an Eastlink Center need, or a major aquatics or rec facility?
So for the aquatic center, really, that's where the benefit of geothermal is, because the vast majority of equipment is actually underground, right? It's the wells. It's really just the wellheads and then piping into a building. So an existing heating plant, it's essentially an existing heating plant with a number of well bores. So, I mean, that obviously has a regulatory restriction as to how close setbacks can be within the city and whatnot. But there's, from a physical infrastructure perspective, it takes up almost no more land than an existing heating plant would for any of those facilities.
And to answer your question about the longevity, so the longevity is based on the management of the field. So if you withdraw too much heat too fast before it can be essentially regenerated, then your field will decline. What we were told in the case of the Regina, it's a 70-year, so the facility is built with a 70-year lifespan, and that was what we were told to model. So all of our calculations in terms of the sizing of the well is based on providing heat with a less than 1 degree temperature drop over a 70-year period.
And just, can I have one more? Just lots of talk about water in the world right now. Can you just give me an impact of like a geothermal? What sort of water uses does a geothermal facility use?
The water use is only during the drilling stage. So you need water, but the operation itself, I mean, essentially, if we're talking about a district heating system, you have to charge your system. So whatever volume of water will fill your pipes is what you charge it with, because typically you use a heat exchanger, and that heat exchanger, so you have initially not necessarily potable water, but you have fresh water on one side of the system, and then what you're withdrawing out of the ground on the other side. And that goes back down in a closed loop. So what we pull out, we put back down into the same formation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Question I've got is, I don't know if it's correct understanding or not, so please give me context if it is or disabuse me if it's not. But my understanding is that it's quite expensive to dig an exploratory well, and you don't really know if you're going to have the heat you need until you've dug a really expensive hole, and there's risk there. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so certainly with geothermal. Now, in Alberta, where we have over 500,000 wells that have been drilled, we actually have quite a good idea of what the subsurface has in terms of heat and in terms of flow. The problem that we have is when we're going deep. So our Alberta #1 project is actually a 4-kilometer deep well, and it's going into what's called the Granite Wash. There are very few wells that are drilled that deep into that formation. So though we have a very good idea of what the temperature is going to be, because Secure Energy allowed us to go and actually temperature log one of their deep wells. So we know we're going to get 120 degrees C, but what we don't know is the flow. But how the industry has developed in time is that a number of different kinds of techniques are now out there. I mean, you might have heard about Evers. So Evers is basically a hot, dry rock. So if we actually get down that deep and we don't have any flow, then we make some decisions. What do we do? So one of the things, the cheapest decision is actually just to go back up the well and use one of those formations, either for water disposal or for CO2 sequestration. So on that first well, we're going to be testing all the way down and understanding what the other formations have so that we have a plan B for that well.
And just to follow up on the amount of information for a heat project where we don't necessarily have to go as deep, there is significant understanding of the temperatures. I mean, you have numerous oil field companies that are disposing of that cooling that warm produced water so that they can dispose of it. And so, I mean, simply we would be looking to capture that water and use the thermal energy from it. And so from a heating perspective, it's quite clear that there are significant opportunities and well-known temperatures, flows, impacts of pressure on the reservoir, all of those pieces.
Yeah, for space heating, we can use temperatures as low as 40 degrees. You know, the higher the temperature you have, depending on, I mean, the less facility that you have to build and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, you've got about 60 to 70 degree resource here at 2 kilometers, which is very similar to what they have in Regina.
And the last question that I've heard is, can you just talk a little bit about just the safety of it if it's near a municipal facility? Concerns about safety.
So no concerns about safety. I mean, I don't know if I'm not sure what the concern would be. I mean, certainly if we're drilling through critical salt, like if there is sour gas, I mean, we have to follow, so a geothermal project has to follow all the same regs and rules that oil and gas does in terms of drilling.
Does anybody else? Oh,
I would say on that piece as well, however, because we are taking the thermal energy out and simply re-injecting, there's less chances for a connection with the outside area. It's essentially a closed loop on the surface where it's open within the reservoir down below. And so that significantly mitigates even some of that risk.
and then Councillor Plott.
Thanks, Chair Bessie. Just curious, you mentioned Regina as something. Is there other models that we can look at as far as schools, hospitals, other things that you guys have been part of that just to kind of give a sense of scale or look at other projects? Or
Not in Canada.
okay. So,
I mean, there are many companies out there that do geo-exchange, which is this shallow, but there are a few companies that actually do the deep geothermal. But there's a number of examples down in the United States, very long-lived facilities. When you asked, is there an end? Well managed. There, in fact, shouldn't be an end. I mean, an end of a facility is more about the surface infrastructure than the heat from the subsurface.
thank you.
Yeah, I would say a great example of that is in October, I toured a district heating facility that in Nevada that had been providing cooling since the 1980s to that town in Nevada, and the infrastructure of that is, simply a pump house and a single wellhead, and then piping beneath the city. And so it's been running for 45 years at this point. And Boise, Idaho has district heating, but there are numerous examples globally of that. And then obviously we don't have the density necessarily here in Canada, but across Europe, there's significant district heating provided by geothermal energy.
So our goal was really just to, geothermal gets a bad rap because everybody talks about the extremely high capex and the exploration risk and all these kinds of things. But really what we wanted to kind of put on the table is that you in Grande Prairie, in the county, in the city, have a geothermal resource here. And as we look to green our economies, and geothermal is not about replacing natural gas. Geothermal is really an augment too, and it is a much better solution than trying to build wind and solar. So if you're thinking about trying to, do wind and solar, just don't. Just look at geothermal, look at that, really great resource that you have here, and try and use it.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that presentation. Thank you for giving us a bit of information. We really appreciate your time here today.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And next up, I am going to hand it over to Chief McEachran for our Chief Service Area update.
Thank you very much, Chair. For this morning, for the service area update, starting with economic development, 4 new businesses have been provided licenses between January 22nd and February 4th. All 4 were commercial-based businesses. In regards to rural renewal stream, we are tracking approximately 10 new applications so far this month in February. The Invest team gearing up right now for Growing the North, which is a fabulous conference starting this evening, going till Thursday. We encourage last-minute registrations for those who have not registered yet. It's a fabulous opportunity to hear about investment opportunities within our region, as well as network with like-minded. We also hosted a meeting with our Economic Development Advisory Committee this past week. In investment attraction, the Invest team is preparing to attend the World Ag Tech and Future Food Summit in March, along with several other Alberta municipalities. And in the events and entertainment, this past weekend, the Bennett Centre was the venue for the 2024 Alberta Winter Games opening ceremonies. Fabulous event with over 5,000 athletes, coaches, officials, and fans in attendance. And coming up shortly is the Big Brothers Big Sisters Ultimate Escape fundraiser. It's being held at the Bows on March 2nd, and the Women of Influence Luncheon, which is held at the Bows on March 8th. Gordy Kiefer tickets are 80% sold out for the show on March 16th. So if that's something that our listeners are interested in, they should get their tickets right away. All tickets are on sale for all of these events at the Bonnet's Energy box office. And with that, I can take any questions.
Chief McEachran, and I'm not seeing any, so I thank you for the update. So next up, we've got a request for a letter of attestation for a telecommunications installation, and I will hand that over to Ms. Tennant.
A letter of support for a telecom installation. This proposal is a little different from others we have seen because instead of a freestanding tower, the applicant is proposing putting antennae on the roof of an existing building, in this case the Paradise Hotel at 11201 100th Avenue. Federal regulations require notification of adjacent property owners, but there are exceptions to those requirements, and in this case, the antennae are small enough that notifications of adjacent property owners was not required. The proposed rooftop location is over 350 meters away from the nearest residential property, so administration was not required to do any adjacent property notifications either. The Grande Prairie Airport has been consulted. This proposal meets the requirements of the Land Use Bylaw Section 54, and administration recommends support of this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Blackmore has a question.
Thank you, Councillor Bressie. I know that building has a lot of antenna on it already, and I'm wondering if there is a time when it reaches maximum load capacity.
Through the chair. Okay. The applicant wishes to answer that.
Sure. Well, so maybe I'll park that question for a second then. Sorry, I was going to do administration and then ask the applicant to present. So maybe what I'll... Sorry, I think what I'll do is, if you can't answer that, we'll just park that question for now and hand it back to the applicant after everybody's had a chance to ask you questions they might have.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I cannot answer that question.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions for administration? One question I've got is, I could just be misremembering, but I don't recall seeing a rooftop antenna coming to committee before. Usually we're only talking about actual towers. Is that because rooftop antennas just haven't been happening, or is this outside our usual process? Just why is this one coming to committee?
Mr. Chairman, the last rooftop application I can remember was 2012. So it has been some time since we have received such an application.
And to our knowledge, is that because they're not happening or just because they don't have to request a letter of attestation?
Through the chair, I will let the applicant explain why they are requesting this letter. When I read the federal regulations, I suspected they did not lead the letter, but they said they do.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Well, with that being said, I know that we've got the proponent of this project online, so if you could just turn off your microphone and introduce yourself, and if you've got anything you want to share with committee, you're more than welcome, and I know you heard a couple questions as well that we'd love some context on. Thank you.
Hi there, this is Michelle Klein from Scott Telecom. I did put in the application and I worked with Diane on that. I don't have the answers to those questions, so I'm going to defer to Sherilyn Batchelor. She is our program manager at Scott Telecom, and she would have more experience with this.
Good afternoon. I'm Sherilyn Batchelor from Scott Telecom Services on behalf of Freedom Mobile. In reference to the question about whether it would reach capacity on the rooftop of the building, that's all dependent on space on the building. There is concerns about RF interference as well, so the mounts do need to be placed a certain distance from the other mount in order to mitigate that interference. My apologies, I'm missing the other question.
And
the letter of attestation.
Yeah, correct.
Letter of attestation. So rooftop installations are excluded from public consultation from according to CPC. I said CPC. However, a letter of attestation is still required from the city.
Thank you. Councillor Blackmore.
Sorry, Councillor Bressie, I forgot to lower my hand.
Oh, that is okay. Anybody else have any questions for the proponent? I'm not seeing any, so thank you, ladies, for coming in and sharing your thoughts with us. We really appreciate it. And I'll give one last chance to ask questions to the administration. Mayor Clayton.
Thanks, Chair Bressie. Just following up on the comment that you said in regards to existing buildings with antennas, can you maybe explain previously how an antenna on a building works, just sort of for public information, because I understand that there may be antennas in the community that we're not aware of, simply because of the fact that the requirement hasn't been a letter of attestation in the previously.
Okay, through the chair, I think the applicant could better answer this.
No, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Thanks, Mr. Johnson.
Through the chair, I guess there is a little bit of confusion on administration's part as to whether or not a letter of attestation is required. The proponent stated that there is, and we certainly have done them in the past, but it has been quite some time. As far as what the installations look like, it's obviously the building height provides the height, and what we've seen in some of the images in the presentation is just a very small tower with some equipment strapped to it. As Councillor Blackmore noted, the Paradise Hotel does have a significant amount of equipment up there. It's our understanding that 214 has some up there as well. As a follow-up to this, we will be digging a little deeper on whether the letter of attestation is required.
Yeah, thank you.
Answers all the questions.
Not seeing any other questions. Is anybody willing to do some business on this? Councillor Plott.
Thanks, Chair Bressie. I just make a motion that committee support this proposal for telecommunications installation.
Excellent. Any discussion or debate on that motion, which is certainly in order? Not seeing any, so I will call that to question. Councillor Bressie in favor? And that motion carries. So I think that wraps up this piece of business. Thank you for everybody's time. We appreciate it. And next up, we have our outstanding items list. Chief McEachran.
Chair Bressie.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Plott.
Thanks, Chair Bressie. I just was hoping to make another motion before we got to the outstanding witnesses.
Oh, my apologies. Yeah, absolutely.
I forgot to mention to you because you're the fill-in chair here this morning, but we had discussed last week about potential housing options in our community, and I've been getting poked quite a bit from some members of UDI wondering about maybe potentially us looking at laxing our secondary suite rules for potential, just to allow more secondary suites built to help this potential issue we have with housing. So I just wanted to make a motion just to have that we ask administration to explore options for what we could do to allow more secondary suites. And wasn't trying to make it super big. I just wanted the administration maybe look at what we're currently doing and look at opportunities for maybe in some areas allowing more secondary suites. From what I'm hearing from the development community, we're getting to the end of most of these developments that are currently open for availability of lots. And so although there's a lot of lots in the community, with the 50-meter setbacks and the rules in place, it's getting really hard to find more locations to build secondary suites. Not saying I want to see them all over town, and I'm not sure what administration will come back with, but I do think it might be a good idea right now with the low number of rental properties we have in Grande Prairie that we look at this as an option.
Just a question for you. Are you concerned about secondary suites in new development, in infill, or both?
I think for me, I don't want to specifically target one area. I'd like administration to kind of come back with pros and cons of why we do it. But I do think we as a council need to look at, is there a period of time here where we're looking at maybe a temporary lax or a certain amount of extras or something? Just speaking from experience, these are one of the quickest ways to get more rental suites put into our economy. And I think industry is ready to build more of them. I know we all want apartment buildings and fourplexes and eightplexes going up, but these are something that traditionally we have built a lot in our city, and we're just running out of land to do them in.
Anybody got any conversation or debate on this? I just want to see the wording. Might have some thoughts on the
I'm fine with some
wording
on the fly.
But definitely don't have concerns with the intent.
pop up in everybody's.
Rusty?
Okay. Yeah, Mayor Clayton?
It's a little vague. Wondering, Councillor Plott, if you're looking for, do you want an update on the current scenario, secondary suites, and so bring back a report that shows currently what the standards are in regards to secondary suites, or are you actually looking for administration to bring back a report that simply removes the current parameters around secondary suites?
And this is where I'm hard. I was hoping for more of a conversation. I don't think we want to remove parameters. I think administration has done a lot of work to get to where we're at. So I don't want to see us go back to where we could have rows and rows of secondary suites, but I would like to see us figure out a hybrid of in between for an interim period, maybe for the 2024 season or something, till we get through this 0% vacancy that we're having in the city.
Mr. Glavin.
Mr. Glavin, I'm curious if there's any thoughts from administration side on how this motion would be actioned if it was carried.
Thanks, Chair Bressy. Yeah, I think what we would do is go away and look at the current regs, what the current supply is based on those regs, and come back with a current state. That's how I would.
Just before I get there, question I've got in, Councillor Plott, you might not have been in council at the time, but I know it wasn't too long ago since we had a report come to us about potential to relax, and I'm curious, of course, it would be good to know the current state where more suites built then, but are you okay with just that report kind of getting dusted off so council can reconsider it, or do you think there's significant new work that needs to happen?
I'm hoping it's not significant new work, to be honest, yeah.
Mayor Clayton?
Yeah, I wonder, so wordsmith it in regards to bringing back a report of the current status. As well, I wonder if it's easy to get information from other municipalities in regards to municipalities that are doing secondary suites differently than us. So there are, if I recall that report, it included some background information. So let's just, maybe the direction is to direct administration to bring back a report on secondary suites for conversation.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
I'm just seeing this motion get retyped, so I'll give that a minute.
Appreciate the team effort on it.
Always happy to help. And we can call that to question whenever it's ready. And that motion carries. And with that, I think I could hand it over to Chief McEachran for outstanding items list.
Thank you, Chair. With the outstanding items list, it remains as presented.
Excellent. Could I have a motion to accept the Mayor Clayton?
So moved.
That motion carries, and with that, I will call us adjourned. I'm not sure who chairs the next meeting, how long a break you want.